As we continue in our look at the letter of 1 Peter, we're going to deviate just a bit from the lectionary path. The second half of chapter 2 is very similar in theme to Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, turning the other cheek and the like, advice for bearing mistreatment and living set-apart lifestyles, both of which we talked about in the recent past. So instead of revisiting those topics, I'd like to keep with last week's training plan for faith fitness and look only at the first 3 verses of chapter 2, as well as a passage from Psalm 34, which 1 Peter alludes to. Hear God's word for us today, first from Psalm 34, verses 8 through 14. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. And from 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy and envy, slander of every kind. Like newborn babies, crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. This is the word of the Lord for us today. Thanks be to God. If last week's reading encouraged us to begin or resume training our minds and spirits for faithful living, you might consider today's installment the diet portion of our training plan. And like any road to healthy eating, step 1 is cleaning out the fridge, eliminating the junk. If you're really serious about this new nutritional journey, or if you're going for a drastic diet overhaul, you know you've got to dig deep. Not just cleaning out the refrigerator, but also the freezer and the pantry and the secret snack stash. If that stuff is anywhere in the house, you'll be tempted, and chances are, at some point, you'll cave. While we aren't talking about actual food here, the task is no less daunting, as the author of this letter draws up a lengthy get rid of list. Rid yourselves of all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander. Malice, not a word we use too often, but nearly every English translation chooses this word. The Greek word is one that also indicates evil or wickedness. We aren't perfect, but we generally don't think of ourselves as evil or wicked, so this one isn't too hard to toss. Deceit doesn't seem too much more difficult at first glance, but if we look a little longer in the mirror of our lives, we might realize just how often we set out to fool others. The good face we put forward at work or church, the social media posts of our picture-perfect lives, the seemingly innocent lies we tell others and ourselves, that we're fine when inside we're an emotional mess, that our marriages, families, or friendships are healthy when the reality is at best managed dysfunction, that we're well off financially when we're actually deep in debt or struggling to maintain our current lifestyle, that our faith is firm when our doubts seem like they'll drown us. The list could go on and on and on, all the ways we hide in plain sight, sometimes in the name of personal privacy, and other times out of shame or fear of how we might be judged if people saw us as we really are. You thought we were going easy today with just 3 verses, but we could spend endless hours on getting rid of deceit alone. Hypocrisy goes hand in hand with deceit. We like to think of hypocrites as two-faced fakes, but the distance between our actions and our values often leaves us judging others by standards we aren't actually keeping ourselves. It's not always intentional. Envy and jealousy seem like a part of human nature. How do we put aside our innate desire to have what others have? It's easy enough to keep from wanting things others have, But how do we stop ourselves from longing for the life someone else has, or their health, or their job, or their self-control, or winning personality? Last in the good riddance list is slander, which seems reasonable until you realize that the word indicates any kind of evil speech. And then nearly all of us are guilty to some degree. I recently read a book about Mr. Rogers, and it seems he could pinpoint only a very few moments of mentally judging someone else, much less moving any of those thoughts to his mouth. I'm afraid I'm no Mr. Rogers. I think he had this whole list mastered, while I struggle with this spiritual elimination diet. Suddenly, a short passage and a 5-word list leaves me feeling like I just gave up everything except onions, garlic, celery, and radishes. Step 1 is a beast. You can't take it on alone. Well, you can, but it's unlikely you'll succeed. If you've ever dieted while everyone else in your house eats whatever they want, you have an idea how hard this task is. We need support if we're going to succeed. Once we're committed to leaving the junk behind, step 2 requires starting over. Back on milk, but not any milk. Pure spiritual milk. There was probably a bit of intentional wordplay going on here. The word for spiritual in Greek is logikos, which is very close in sound to the word for word, logos. And the word is exactly the pure spiritual milk that is needed in order to be nourished and grow in faith. The word spiritual, which in our culture carries a connotation of something that produces an emotional response, actually has a much less feeling-oriented meaning in the Greek. Spiritual in Greek included both reason and speech, mind and soul, and was considered rational and logical. That might seem like a nice bit of useless linguistic trivia, but it's important in understanding that feeding on the pure spiritual milk of the Word is not just a touchy-feely experience. It involves deep thinking, study, and consideration, not just hearing or reading and experiencing an emotional response. Sometimes we are blessed with a powerful experience of the Spirit when feasting on God's Word. And sometimes we're simply being nourished. Every meal isn't our favorite, and nourishment is not all sweet treats, but we are fed. An important aside, some folks take this passage to apply only to those new to the faith, as it was written to converts not from a Jewish background. The argument is that such newborn Christians need spiritual milk, the very easily digestible basics of the faith, not a full-course theological meal for those grown-ups or more mature in their walk with Christ. That's certainly a possible interpretation, and even if it were the original intent, I think we could all stand to get back to basics and on a regular basis. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself here, but I find I need simple, healthy, regular meals of God's Word more than I need deep theological treatises that require multiple readings just to begin to understand the author's point. So we've eliminated the junk and begun feeding on that which builds us up in mind and spirit, all because we have tasted that the Lord is good. Here we hear one of several references to Psalm 34, which will be quoted at length in the next chapter as well. It's surprising how many Old Testament quotes there are in a letter for Gentiles not familiar with the Jewish holy text. Maybe the hope was to whet their appetite, to encourage them to feed on the Word, but we don't really know. At any rate, the verb taste is used in the New Testament to reflect one's experience, and those hearing this letter then and now have experienced God's goodness and will continue to taste and see God as they feed on what is good and worthy and true. We will taste and see God's goodness in our personal growth and deepening faith as well as in the changes in what we crave. Did you notice that? It didn't just say, drink your milk or eat your meals, but crave, long for, desire God's pure spiritual milk. When I was young and a part of FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, some clever person came up with the idea of using the verse, taste and see that the Lord is good, on a t-shirt with the Krispy Kreme donut logo. I mean, what says delicious goodness better than a hot and glazed donut? Well, it's sweet to taste, and it sure leaves you wanting more. But Krispy Kreme has likely never been accused of being pure. And donut consumption might promote growth, but not the positive kind. In fact, it's sadly the opposite. When we feed our sugar craving, the short-term sugar high leads to the inevitable sugar crash, which leaves us feeling lousy. I'm not faulting the shirt designer. I seriously doubt a basket of fruits and veggies with the same verse would have been very popular amongst the teen crowd. But as we learned last week, when we know better, we do better. And as difficult as eliminating the negative habits of our old selves and replacing with God's good word may be, the end result is that we turn around one day and realize that what we crave is not the sweet, sugar-coated goodness of the world. Instead, we find ourselves not just hungry in general, but craving God's word, longing to encounter God's presence there. As we feast at God's table, we find ourselves nourished and full, and then we can't imagine going back to donuts and deceit. My prayer for you this week is that you find someone who will partner with you on this journey of faith fitness, that together you can help each other clear out the old, and together you can feast on the pure spiritual milk God offers, and together that you will taste and see that the Lord is good. With God's help, may it be so. Amen.